Hi, everybody. This is Vikram Fernandes. I'm the Director of Business Development and Alliances for Cloudian. How many of you are familiar with Cloudian? Okay, one hand. Good. So, at a high level, what we try to do is we're trying to get an AWS type S3 on-premise. People must be familiar with S3, I'm assuming here. So, it's typically the cloud unstructured data storage, right? And if you look at the journey, right, before I get into the reason why Cloudian came into being, the industry, when they wanted to get into the public cloud, right, they needed a standard API for storage so that every vendor doesn't do their own thing, right? So they have some kind of a coherence in terms of what they can do and what they can use for their applications. End of the day, people buy applications. Infra is just a incidental expense, is what I say, right? So you buy applications, and that application obviously is dependent on data. And as long as the application can seamlessly use the data, I think it makes that journey easy for them. So if I have to give an analogy, let's think about what happened to Nokia a few years back. When Nokia had a great phone, but then that was the problem, right? It was only a phone. And people wanted something more than a phone, right? And that's when we had the journey of Android and iOS, and the app ecosystems they built around that, right? And today, that's what is driving their business. People every year think, it's iOS, version 16 of the iPhone. No, I think it's the iOS version which is more interesting, what it does, or what the Android version does next, because that's what is giving the capability to the hardware. And I think the enterprise has been very late to adopt this, right? Think of it. We made this so seamless for end users who are using phones to move from one platform to another, having their contacts, their photographs, their data move from here to there. But when it comes to the enterprise, even today, that's still a challenge. So if you look at today's challenge, right? Data growth, cloud complexity, data sovereignty, security, why are these problems there? Because that has not been addressed on the enterprise side. And that's a journey, right? And I think that journey, if you look at how the AWS of the world addressed it, was to create this API called S3, Simple Storage Service. That's what it stands for. And there was also another API called Swift, pretty much like HD, DVD, and Blu-ray. There was a nice fight between the two. But today, I think more or less, with AWS becoming the de facto cloud provider today, the S3 standard has been adopted. And there's a lot of development which has happened on applications on the S3 platform. So what does it mean? Today, if somebody is running an application in the public cloud, or if they've born in the cloud, the application, then it already understands S3. And when we talk about CloudStack, the intent is not to run it on the public cloud, but to run it on an alternate cloud for a hybrid platform, or maybe as a private cloud in an enterprise environment. So how do I get these workloads which are in the public cloud back on-premise? How do I do that? And that's where Cloudian came up with this solution of S3, right? We call it secure hybrid data lake because data is the new currency, right? For AI or be it any application which is there in the market, right? And with AI, we are only going to see the adoption more and more increasing in terms of the size because of the type of LLMs and others we are seeing. The data is critical. That said, we adopted the S3 API way back in 2011. So when AWS took the S3 API to the public cloud, we brought the S3 API on-premise so that vendors who don't want to be on the public cloud, because we always knew while the cloud is the cool new kid in town at that point of time, world is always going to be hybrid. It's going to be, there'll always be public cloud, there'll also be an on-prem solution. If you look at AI and solutions like those, the data is very critical. Most governments don't want this to be on somebody else's data center, somebody else's country. It has to be in-house, in-country. And that's where we are seeing a lot of adoption where for the data gravity, they're getting this data back on-premise. And which is where we felt that with CloudStack as a provider, right, this could be a good opportunity because you enable the cloud on-premise and we enable the data on-premise for the cloud, right? So why hybrid? Because it's a common API, whether it's public cloud or on-prem, we can talk to both the public cloud and on-prem with the same API. So the application can seamlessly move from the public cloud to on-premise, which is what everybody wants. It's known API, which is S3, and it is secure, which is pretty interesting because we are cohesive validated solution, so it's used by the US Defense as well. So it's a pretty secure solution. I think one of the most secure object storage platform which is there in the market today. Okay. From a data lake perspective, this data lake could be for ETL workflows. It could be for video streams. It could be for AI/ML workflows. But this is a very growing area where I would say it's still fluid in terms of how it's defined. But the idea here is to become what S3 is to AWS. Similarly, we want to become the same unstructured data store for private cloud and the enterprises. And today we have seen a huge number of adoption. I'll show you the number of customers we have. I mean, some of them who are listed here. So these are primarily, we're built for the enterprise. These are some of the features which we have, right? So if you look at it, it's the highest S3 compatibility. Now, when people talk about S3 compatibility, it's very important. Let me give you an example. You have people like Minayo, you have ECS, you have StorageGrid, so many people who talk about S3. Everybody say S3, yeah, we support S3. But then the question is, what do you support in S3? Because S3 is not like NFS or SMB. If you say I support SMB 3.0, you either support it or you don't support it. NFS 4, I either support it or I don't support it. There's nothing in between. S3, on the other hand, is a little bit more fluid, right? So I can do get, put, and delete and say I support S3. But then, who's going to support IAM? Who's going to support multi-part upload? Who's going to support myriad of other APIs which are there? And depending on how many applications you're going to run on your platform, each application supports a different set of APIs. So today, we are almost 90% compliant with the S3 API. So apart from AWS, we are the next vendor who has the most implementation of S3 APIs in our platform. Even if I take a vendor like EMC today, I think they support around 45% of it. So there's a long way to go for them. So this is our advantage. What it means is, if you have an application in the public cloud, you want to get it back on-prem, you can do it seamlessly by just changing the pointer of the S3 to the on-prem storage, right? It's as simple as that. So it's a very important thing, and that's something which we are built on the API itself, right? And there's no limit in the scalability because the scale-out architecture keep adding nodes, keep growing. That's pretty much the fundamental of the cloud, right? From a security perspective, we have done a lot of security certification like FINRA, Sec 17, all that is already done. So whether it's a financial organization or a government organization, it's ready for deployment there. Geo-distribution is more from how we can do BCP. So all this is supported pretty good, and we have a good integration with CloudStack, and that's where we are. So this is some of our typical deployments you will see. So if it's an on-prem solution, you have you can have site 1, site 2. You can have basically Cloudian is what you have a server. Inside the server, you install this operating system called Linux, which we all love, right? And on that Linux platform, I have the HyperStore, which is our object storage platform deployed. And then that kind of, percolates across multiple servers and creates a single storage. There's no limit to the growth. You can keep adding servers, growing this cluster. It can be as big as you want it. And you can create regions, separate DCs, virtual DCs, all logically partitioning that storage so that it can be used for business continuity process and others. When we talk about hybrid cloud, the idea here is that how the data is moving from the public cloud to on-prem, or if you're able to move the data from the private cloud to the public cloud. In our case, we can tier data to the public cloud, or you can tier the data back from the public cloud to us because we use the same API as the public cloud, which is the S3, right? So there is no need to have any other data mover. we can manage the data without that. And on a multi-cloud, this is more interesting because there might be customers who said, I want DC1, which is private cloud with CloudStack, maybe DC2 is AWS, and DC3, which is going to be Google, right? It is possible with us because we talk the same language of S3, right? And that's why that S3 language is so important in our use case here. So these are some of our security, certifications which is already done in the box, right? Now, why this is very important, this is all at the software layer. Doesn't matter which hardware platform you put behind. The certification holds good. Second, we support encryption, both at rest and inline, right? From data immutability and multi-tenancy is another key aspect of how the storage has been built. So this view kind of gives you a perspective of how the same platform can work for different workloads. So if you see on the extreme left, you have the backup workflows like with Veeam, Rubrik, to something like containers like Kubernetes and OpenShift using the same platform, right? The idea here is when you're using a container and you want a persistent storage, with Cloudian, you're using the S3 operator to do that instead of using a Cinder driver, right? A driver to achieve it. That's the reason it is, even though the versions of OpenShift can change, we don't have a problem with it because we are using an API. And that API doesn't change with versions. It's not a driver, right? Similarly, there are up to a number of other applications which work with this. Technically, any application which works with AWS, Azure, or Google will out of the box work with this. That's the story here, right? Any questions you guys have on this? Anybody? Okay. So I just thought, we spoke about the public cloud, hybrid cloud. I just want to give an equivalence of how this connects, right? So if you look at the infrastructure as a service layer, right, which is where you use CloudStack at the upper layer to manage the VMs. So in case of the public cloud, for the compute they use like EC2 or Azure VMs, GCP Compute Engine. For structured data store, they use EBS. And then you have the unstructured data which sits on S3, Blob, or Glacier. The only difference between Glacier and the S3 is one is running on tape and the other one is running on disk. That's the main difference. But otherwise, it's the same thing. Now, if you were to build a similar solution on the right side, you see, like I've taken Apicalus as an example here because it's one of our partners, and we work with them very well, and we are pretty well integrated. They use CloudStack again, and they can orchestrate the VMs. They have a different layer for the structured data store, which I think is also one of the vendors outside, right? Storepool, if I'm correct, and Cloudian Object Storage fits the S3 and the Glacier layer, where we complete the IaaS story for on-premise. So this diagram primarily was to show how it is one-to-one mapped between the public cloud to the to the on-prem private cloud. This is what allows you to move application from left to right or from right to left. And this seamless movement of application obviously makes customer the king, right? Which is what the customer likes. And that also builds trust that, we are not locking them in any way, which goes with the open source ethos as well, right? So what type of data sits on S3, right? So this slide primarily gathers what type of data sits here. Earlier, structured and unstructured data had a very sharp separation. But with the advent of the cloud, what happened is EBS is more expensive, S3 is less expensive. So the behavior of the application developer changed with that. Today we are seeing vendors like Splunk who actually use more of the unstructured data store like S3 instead of the structured data store because they want to save costs, right? Microsoft with SQL 2022, SQL has always been a block storage, right? It always needed a block storage. First time, they're going to be writing it on S3, and it's built for S3 now, right? Dremio, multiple applications. So for data lake, data protection, just storage services, right? Now this has become the main storage or I would say it's more or less become the primary storage for the industry. AI/ML is another one which is very important. I've not mentioned this, but just 3 days back, we launched GPU direct to object. So this is an industry first. We are the first object storage vendor, or the only object storage vendor today in the world to have GPU direct to object, right? And what does it allow? It allows huge amount of data which is already residing in an object to be able to feed the GPUs for your AI/ML workflows to get outcomes which help the business. So these are some of the main use cases which we see, okay, with this S3 storage and why it is needed. So when you have a CloudStack deployment, it's not just about having the block layer, but the object layer is also required. What does it help achieve, right? So these are all the use cases which you see. So data lake is one of them. So you see the names of applications like Microsoft, Teradata, Druid. All these are anyway, integrated with us because of the S3 API. Similarly, data protection, modernization, a lot of backup softwares already supported. So there's nothing to be done. It's just more or less you'll be able to use it just if you have this deployed, right? Same thing with cloud repatriation hybrid cloud. If you want to have the beauty of CloudStack, at the same time you want probably a disaster recovery in a public cloud to save money, that can also be done, right? So that's the story of the use cases. And then these are some of our customers worldwide, okay? Just to give you, so the US defense is a pretty interesting one because the NSA runs the storage internally, right? Then we have a lot of service providers, right from Yota to CCL, to Spark, to SIFI. So we have FastWeb in Europe, which is an Italy-based company, but a lot of them are using us, a lot of banks are using us already. So this is pretty much an enterprise-ready solution, all right? With that, I end my presentation, and I hope it was productive. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Any questions from the audience?
On slide number 7, when can we see the CloudStack logo?
Oh yeah, so soon, very soon. So the thing is, we had a plugin for CloudStack some time back, and then we are rejigging it again. It's already done. I think CloudStack has to release it in the next release. That's what they've told us. So we've already given the code, submitted the code.
Could you talk about this new plugin which is being donated or being submitted for review, and also what benefits will it have for CloudStack users and Cloudian users? Thank you.
So the key benefit is it will integrate where you can manage the deployment of buckets from the CloudStack console itself. I think CloudStack has an open S3 framework which has been given. So whatever the framework allows, we are trying to implement it in the 1.0. What Tom told us, Tom is our engineering guy who unfortunately couldn't make it here, but he's put the package in and he submitted it. So we should get it anytime soon, right? When the next release comes in. I think the integration you guys were looking for in terms of being able to provision the buckets from CloudStack will happen with this. Okay.